Hello and welcome to our event. It's one of the hottest days in the Midwest, and we're thinking about Christmas. That's exactly how it should go, of course. Um, we are doing Christmas in July, so we have a whole bunch of projects. You're going to be able to see a QR code later pop up, and that will take you to the download for different patterns and projects that we have going on. There goes the QR code. Thanks. And it will also give you information about other projects besides quilting. We have things that have to do with yummy food and ideas for maybe this next holiday season that you'd like to do, and crochet and knit and all kinds of wonderful things. So jump in there, see what other projects we have. There are so many different kinds of projects. So if you need a break from quilting, I don't know why you would, but if you're looking for all kinds of different craft activities that have to do with the Christmas season, jump in and look for those. I'm Colleen Tauke, and I'm your instructor for this little event. And we are making a bed runner called Christmas Dreamin. So, there are so many ways that we as quilters look for projects to decorate when it comes to the holidays. And we can make entire bed quilts. We make placemats. We do wall hangings. We do all those Christmas gifts for all the people that we love. But sometimes an entire big quilt is a little too daunting, so that we don't ever get anything done for ourselves. So I thought, well, why not make just a bed runner that I can accent across the foot of my bed and have a little fun with these Christmas fabrics that I absolutely love, and not have to make an entire quilt. So that's where the birth of the Christmas Dreamin' runner came from. So the pattern, you will find that it is made to go across a queen size bed with a nice little drop to it. It finishes 99 and a half inches long and narrow, but that keeps it draped across so you can actually see it instead of just being like a table runner top on the very top of the bed. I kind of like to wrap around the edges a little bit. And with just that one simple block and a really fun focused fabric, we can create this bed runner. So if you haven't had a chance to download the pattern yet, do so maybe at the end. Come back and hit that QR code for the download. If you already have, grab something to write with. And at the very last page, there's always a spot for notes that you can take. So maybe some of the tips and tricks that you'll pick up along the way. And if you haven't downloaded it yet, always grab something to write on. We've got people from all over. So Debbie says, good morning from hot Texas. We're joining you today. Esther says, good morning from the Netherlands. Thanks for being here. Midge says, hello from the UK. I believe it's getting hot over there too. Madeline says, good morning from Chester, New York. We love to see where you're watching from. And I believe there was even someone who popped in early and said, hello from Central Iowa. So you're right, my neighbor just down the road. So let us know where you're watching from. Tell us whether or not this looks like something you might make. Maybe you'll adapt it and make a table runner out of it. Because you could just make 3 of the stars and make a really fabulous table runner. If you have one of those really long farmhouse tables, maybe it's a runner for that. Or maybe you'll take 4 of the blocks and make a tree skirt or a wall hanging. So once you have the block, it's so much fun to just take that as an idea and run. So wonderful. Angie says, good morning from Utah. Thanks for joining us, Angie. So our project, Christmas Dreamin', really came about because I found this fabulous, and it's a motif fabric, a Christmas fabric, and it is from a couple of maybe at least 1 or 2 years ago, but I've used it before. So this kind of helps tie together some of the projects that I have decorating for Christmas. But I love this big floral, but I didn't want to dice it up into really, really small pieces. So that's where it became the focal point in the center of my blocks and as the border for this. So then I took this fabric and I, of course, started looking for reds and greens. And that's when I came up with the fun dot that has that green and red in it. And then I needed a red. So if you follow me at all, you know that I love to use stripes, dots, and plaids. So I had to have my wonderful little check plaid like thing going on in there. And then with all of those prints, I decided I need some quiet space. So I just went with a plain white as the background, just enough to let that star pop out in the project. So once you have your fabric selected, then it's time to do all the cutting and getting everything prepped. So I did use a bit of spray starch on my fabrics before I began because we're going to be making some triangles and some flying geese later, and they can get a little distorted in the pressing process. So maybe a little spray starch if you know that when you press, you tend to distort a little bit. I use my favorite product as Best Press, the unscented version, so that my fabrics have just a little bit more of a hand to them so that they stay stable as I'm working on with them. So I'm going to get my iron ready to go here. This is the center block. Of course, that large print works perfect. I didn't even have to worry about really fussy cutting. I just took 6.5-inch squares so that I would get a lot of the wonderful floral to just land in that center spot. So we set that aside, and we're cutting pieces to do half squares, which will go in the outer corners of our block in the white and the green. So those are cut 4 inches. And then in order to make the flying geese units, that's the points that go on the outer edge of our star, I'm going to do the 4 at a time method. And if you follow me, you know that I like to do things kind of in a multiples, if at all possible. Now, when I wrote this, I did do we're doing half squares 2 at a time, just because I didn't want to waste any time because we would have extras if we did the 8 at a time, if you're doing this many stars. So just 2 at a time method on these. We're going to do these 4 at a time. So actually, we will really complete all of these stars for one whole block very quickly. So as we get going, let's see who we've got watching. We've got Nancy who says, hello from hot Fort Worth. Yep. One of my kids and daughter-in-law and grandkids were down that way all last week, and I'm waiting to hear about the warm stories. Shelby says, hello from scorching Oklahoma. Our low temperature this week was 103. Oh my, that's warm. And then Jane says, hello, Roots from Winchester, UK. Yay, from the UK. Nicole says, good morning from British Columbia. And you're finally getting some rain. We need some of that rain. Send it our way next. That would be wonderful. Okay. The first thing we're going to do is work on that 4 at a time flying geese method. And it's been around for a while. Maybe some of you have used it. Maybe it's your favorite technique. It is one of mine because when I did flying geese units in the traditional method, which means that you would start with a rectangle and you put a square on each side and did that diagonal seam and flipped it back, mine always seemed to get kind of splayed out. They never seemed to be a rectangle when I was finished. And when I found this method, I had better luck. So I'm sticking with the 4 at a time method. We're just going to mark on the back side of each of the 4 red pieces. So those are going to make the triangles in the outer corners. Our geese are actually going to be the white portion. I will mark just a diagonal on each of these. And this pen has given up the ghost. So let's go with a marker instead. You do have to have enough of a line to actually see it. So if you are confident in stitching a 1/4 inch from a center marked line, diagonal corner to corner, do so. If you don't feel confident yet in getting that 1/4 inch, then default to one of the tools created for doing that marking so that it's a 1/4 inch from each side of this tool from the center. But if you have done enough of these, you may be starting to feel a little bit more confident about where your 1/4 inch seam is. And the nice thing about doing this method is that I tend to err, and I know myself well after 20 some years of quilting, my errors tend to come in my cutting because I tend to get distracted while I'm doing my cutting. I just want to get through with it because I really want to get to the machine. In doing this, in this method, we are going to cut 5 pieces and make 4 flying geese. In the traditional method, you would have to cut 12 pieces. You would cut 3 cuts for each side of the block, or of the center block. So 3 times 4 is 12. And I know myself, in cutting 12 pieces, something's going to get goofed up. But if I'm only cutting 5, I reduce my chances by quite a bit. So I'm probably down to 1/3 of the chance of making an error in my cutting. So if I can reduce that, I can have more success. So let's see. We've got Alice, who says good morning from Apple Valley, California. Alice, Apple Valley, California. I know someone else from Apple Valley, California. I don't know if she's watching today or listening. Carol says hello from Illinois. And we have Fibula, who says, do you use any special kind of pen or marking pens to make the marking on the fabric? My favorite, and now all these are markings on the wrong side of the fabric, are the friction pens. And they come as like an ink pen or as a marker. I found the markers flow really nicely. I also use, you opened a can of worms because I love a lot of different kind of marking tools. Sometimes I'll use just a simple mechanical pencil. That works too. It's a very light line. So for video, it's hard for you to see what I've done, but this is my go-to a lot of times in my sewing room. The other is the ceramic pencil if I'm marking on dark fabrics, because the challenge has always been, how do you make a mark on dark black, dark navy blue, dark green, chocolate brown, a burgundy, because all of these work great on light fabrics, but they don't work on dark fabrics. And the ceramic pencil in either the white or it's kind of a sagey green color or minty green color, they all work great on dark fabrics. And they leave a really nice mark that you can see. Let's see if I can find something dark as an example. I'm going to make a mark on the dark green flower here. And hopefully the camera will pick it up. There is a white line across that dark green that I would be able to see really easily in order to stitch on the line. So the ceramic pencil is my go-to when I'm working on dark fabrics. The friction pens tend to be the ones I use for the marking on light fabrics. So those are kind of the 2 favorites of those. Now, the friction pens were not made for fabric. I understand that. They dissipate when they're ironed over, but to ensure that we don't get ghost lines or markings to come up later, I always use them on the wrong side of the fabric. They can be washed away if the end project is laundered. The chemicals will come out of the fabric and it will be gone. But maybe your project won't be laundered right away and the inks may stain or stay within the fibers. So that's why I always make sure I'm marking on the back side of the fabric. Now that I've got these marked, we'll go on. We got Nancy, who says good morning from Kansas City, and Christine from Windsor, Canada. Sorry, my bifocals are stretched a little bit. Lisa says the fabric is beautiful for the runner. Thanks, I appreciate that. It was kind of a challenge because they said, let's do Christmas in July. They said the new Christmas fabrics weren't out yet. So I had to rely on a stash of Christmas fabric. Oh my. Of course, we always have things in our stash. So it went shopping in my own closet or my stash of fabrics to put this together. So you may find that the new Christmas fabrics are out and you want to go shopping. So that would be the time to pick up some new fun Christmas fabric. Okay, we're doing the 4 at a time. So this is how I'm layering this right sides together. I'm using the first 2 3 and 7/8 inch squares. I'm laying these on corner to corner and see how the line kind of lines up down the center. Let's see if I can there. Hopefully we can catch that on camera. And I put a couple pins in just because I have to move it from here to here, and I don't want things to shift out of place. I'll take the pins out as I approach them. And let's see. You're welcome. There's always that, what tool do we use? So it's always fun to hear recommendations of what other quilters use. We've got someone asking, or so hello from Virginia. I can try to pick up your name. Maravit, I think. A beginner and beginner in the art of quilting, and I love it. Wonderful. We love adding people to our I would say cult, but our community, because as quilters, we have our own kind of set of language. We talk about quilts, and it's the common ground that really does hold us in friendship very quickly. So now I am stitching 1/4 inch to each side of that marked line that I put on my smaller squares, and that will put in the first connection between these fabrics. Let's get to the end here quick. And then as I go down one side, I will break thread and flip it around and go down the other side. Okay, using my little thread spider here so we don't have too long of tails at the beginning and end. This machine doesn't really like stitching into nothing, so by putting a little fabric under the needle to get started, really, there we go. No one ever has accused me of sewing slow. Even my mother, as a kid, my mom would be like, go slow. And I'd be like, no, I want to get to the next portion. It's more fun. Okay, here we go. So now I have stitched across that direction. So now I'm going to take it over to the iron, and I'm going to heat set my fibers so that that thread kind of sinks into my fabric. It's always best to do that press in between. And then I'm going to cut it apart. And if you're new to quilting, this is definitely one of those, do I have a longer ruler here? No, we'll just use this one, and I'll slide it along. We're going to cut down between those stitched lines. The 1/4 inch doesn't have to be super exact because the stitching has already been put in place. So now I have two pieces that look, well, sometimes people say they look a little like a fox. So I have like this and a second one. Don't forget that you have two pieces of this. I'm going to take it to the ironing board, and I'm going to press the seam allowances toward the smaller triangles. So up and away. Because sometimes we get busy and we work on one side and we forget that there's a second half of it. And you've got to make sure we create all of the pieces needed. So by opening that with my finger and just getting it all the way to the stitching line, I want that all the way open. I don't want to have a false ditch in there, so that all of the fabric that's there is showing all up to the stitching line. It would be important in the final step. Okay, now I have two that look like this, and there are diagrams in your pattern, so they will help you to stay follow right along with this. Then the next two, you have 4 of these right now. We have 2 left. We're putting one here and one here, making sure that we align the right angles down into the point of the goose there. If you want to put a pin in, just one to hold it so it doesn't slide. These are easy, a little bit easier when you have them fairly small. When they get a little bigger, pieces can slide apart as you move things around. So then we take these over and stitch these together. Kathy says, how do you choose your colors? Okay. I really did start with the floral. I fell in love with that first. Basically, I walked to the Christmas section at a very large quilt shop here in North Central Iowa. First thing that caught my eye was this floral. It said, you have to go home. So that was my inspiration. And then from there, I looked at the colors within that and picked those colors to complement. So sometimes when you find a multi-print, it really does help you give you a jumping off point of what direction to go with your colors. The other thing is, and let's see, I trimmed the selvage off of this already. On the selvage, sometimes you still see, and well, this one has triangles. Here's the other thing you can do. Look to the selvage edge of fabric, and it will give you little color samples of the colors within the print. And that can be like your paint chip for what other colors may go well with it, so that you may find friendly fabrics that might then blend together. But I like to go for the multi first, my focus fabric, and then pick colors off of that help bring out the green, complement the red. And then there was the white in this so that it had some place for your eye to kind of be quiet and rest a bit. And that's why I end up choosing it kind of to be the background fabric, so that the star would jump out when you looked at the overall design. So that's a little bit of thought of how I go about picking fabrics for projects. Sometimes there's not a lot of rhyme or reason to it. Other times it's like that big focus that says, ooh, your eye keeps going back to it. You're stuck on it. And that's kind of gives you a telltale sign you've fallen in love with that fabric. Nancy says, Halloween is my daughter-in-law's favorite holiday. I know someone else's whose favorite is Halloween too, who lives here in Central Iowa. I'm thinking of using Halloween fabric for the pattern. That would be fun, because you wouldn't have to invest in an entire quilt. You could make a bed runner. You could turn it into a table runner too. There's a lot of ways you could interpret it, and it would be a quicker project than making an entire quilt. So that's a really fabulous way to use the design in another project completely. Alina says she's watching from Bangladesh. That's great. We are glad that you are here. Carol asks, do you use steam when pressing or a dry iron? You know, the iron debate has always raged in the quilt world. I live in an area where the water is fairly hard, and the tap water. And when I have used steam in the past, I have destroyed more irons than I want to even admit. So I have now just decided, just use a dry iron and don't worry about steam. If I want steam, I will use a mist bottle, Best Press, or some other product to add moisture to the fibers when I'm pressing. So the answer is both. If you can be very diligent and buy distilled water for your iron and not destroy your iron, then you could use steam in it. But remember that when you add moisture to your patchwork, distortion can happen very easily. So if you're going to be a steam person, make sure you don't overwork your blocks, which means don't move that iron a lot and stretch your pieces out. Okay. And I'll talk about that in just a second as I'm ironing. Okay. Now I've added block 3 and 4 to this. And now what I need to do is set my seam and cut the pieces apart. Pressing means to put pressure on or use a nice heavy iron. The one thing about cordless irons is they tend not to be super heavy. I have a lot heavier iron upstairs in my other studio, and it does the work for me. You just drop it on there and it just makes everything flat. So when you go to purchase an iron, buy the heaviest iron you can handle, and make sure that you press, don't iron, because when you start to move back and forth, that's maybe okay on a dress shirt or a skirt that you're trying to press to wear for an event, but it's really hard on patchwork because it tends to distort things. Okay, Alice says, that's a gorgeous floral. Yep, I believe it. I love it too. Let's see. Linda asks, better late than never. Howdy from Texas. You know what? You can always watch us on repeat because all of our videos go into archive and you can watch them at your leisure. So you can go back to the beginning if you'd like. When you come across a fabric you like, but don't have a specific project in mind, how much do you buy? Yeah, the age-old question, because it never seems like it's enough. Okay, while I'm cutting these apart, let's discuss how much yardage to buy if you decide you have a fabric that you absolutely love. It used to be, oh, I'll just buy a little piece, and that never quite worked out. Then I went to a yard, and a yard is good, but it doesn't allow you to maybe use it as a border and then use pieces in a quilt. So at this point, I'm at 2 yards. So that 2 yards will give me enough to do a border on a quilt and use some of it in the piecing of a quilt. Now, I'm not making a king size quilt. I'm talking about a queen or smaller. If you really, really love something and you don't know for sure what size you're going to make, 3 yards, I used to hear people say, and I thought that was ridiculous, but it probably isn't. So between 2 and 3 yards, if you decide that it's great enough to use as a border and you would like to use it within a quilt, somewhere between 2 and 3 yards. Fabric companies will love us because, yes, that's not just buy a fat quarter or a half yard, because that's never enough, I promise you. And it's frustrating. Okay. Nana says, hi from Colombia. Nana, I wonder if that's a nickname because you're a grandma like me, or if it's your actual name for Nancy. We'll see. Let's see. I think we're finally caught up on hellos and shout outs. Let's make sure we get these pressed open to get our flying geese made. 1. Got these pressed flat. We just need to get them pressed open. And then we're going to make sure that they're the right size and trim up the little dog ears on the edges. So I've got 2, 3. You know, this is kind of one of those techniques that's really addictive, that you start working and think, oh, I'll just make one set of 4. And pretty soon you have a whole bunch made really fast. Trust me. Okay, and the last one. And I'm going to point out the areas that give you that nice 1/4 inch seam allowance where the crisscross of your triangles ought to be, so that you will be looking for those points when you put this together also. Okay, now our board up here and something to point with. Okay, your 2 fabrics should come together at these lower corners. This diagonal should come right into the corner. So your anatomy of flying geese, you want that diagonal coming right into the corner. We still have dog ears out here, but we have to trim those. When you get to the nose of the goose here, from this intersection, the peak of the point to the outer edge should be a 1/4 inch. So those should overlap nicely, and you should get that straight edge along here. There is still a dog ear up here, but this should stay nice and straight. And when I did the traditional method of flippy corners on there, I never could get this to be straight. It always seemed to bow. So here's where this comes out a lot more accurate. And I was talking through sewing. So if it can come out accurate while I'm talking, can you imagine when you're actually concentrating? So this is the accurate flying geese unit we need. We're going to look to make sure that they're 3.5 by 6.5, so that they will match up against our center square. And I have marked my ruler. That's why I called for at least a 6.5 inch square ruler, because you need 6.5 by 3.5 when you go to trim these, and make sure that you're in the zone of where they need to be. Okay, so all I need to do, everything's coming out right in place, is I'm just taking my dog ears off. So they should come out nice and neat. And once you get them all trimmed up, there's your flying geese unit. And then go down through all of those and trim them nice and tidy, because we don't need all the extra points inside of our patchwork. So now we're down to the corners, and this is a half square triangle method that a lot of you have probably used. And if not, the instructions give good diagrams Again, we're marking corner to corner like we did last time, and we're going to stitch on each side. If you need those training wheels, mark your 1/4 inch seam. I did it for a long time until I got really comfortable and knew for sure on my machine where my 1/4 inch seam allowance was. And then you're going to do this process twice for each of the stars that you're going to put into your table runner. I'm going to mark 2 of them, then I'll just piggyback one after the other. Okay. You guys have a lot of questions today. Good thing. I like that. Okay. Darlene, or Denise, I'm sorry, says, do you use regular ironing board or wool pressing mat? Down here, this is a travel board, so it's very firm. I'm not using a wool mat here. Upstairs in my sewing studio that I use when I'm creating these kinds of things, I've kind of cheated. I have one of the big boards, the wide that's like, I don't even know how many feet long it is, 5 feet long maybe. The wide boards for pressing. And I took a piece of wool fabric that I had that someone had given me. It's a piece of Pendleton wool, something in a color I would never use. And I cut a piece of that. I shrunk it. I lay that on top of my cutting or my pressing board or my ironing surface. And I use that. It gives enough cushion so that I don't smash things too bad, but it does hold heat nicely. So, and when I don't want to use it, I can just peel it back because it's just a rectangle of fabric. So I don't have one of the legit wool pressing mats. I have used them in the past. They seem to work really nice. They are an investment, I will admit. That's probably one of the main reasons why I haven't invested in them, just because they're a little on the pricey side. And I seem to be able to get a decent press on most of my patchwork without one. But for some people, they absolutely love them. So I'm not saying a hard and fast yes or no on that, since I kind of made it an adapted version out of a piece of wool fabric. And it's a really heavy wool, and when I washed it, it felted nicely because it's 100% wool. So it has that cushion to it and holds heat nicely. So quilters, we adapt everything. We see something and we find a way to create what we want or need. So perfect question. Let's see. Sharon says, what is your pressing mat? Hello from Maine. Love the technique. We'll definitely try this out. This pressing board, because it fits into the studio nicely, it has a cutting mat on the other side. It's made by Omnigrid, I believe. And it has a warped mat on the back side that I can't use. So it's a travel kind. It folds. It has a handle. But the pressing surface is perfect for the size in the studio. So that's what I have traditionally been using in most of my video. And because it's a very firm surface, it does a nice job of pressing things nice and flat. Okay, I'm going to stitch this last half square triangle here just so we can lay everything out and look at how it goes together. And I have a tip that I want to share with you on joining these together so that the star points will kind of be aligned when you're finished. So let me get across this really quick. Stitching on both sides of that diagonal line. Debbie says, love doing the 4 at a time flying geese. Yep. It just somehow my accuracy increases. It makes my patchwork look better. So, anything that we can find to make our patchwork go together more smoothly, reduce the amount of cutting and error, because like I said, I'm the first to admit that I was working on something yesterday, and as I was putting something together, I thought I had it cut right, and it was too big. I had to go back and trim it down because, of course, I got distracted, and it was just a little oversized. It had to be trimmed down. It's always nice that it's a little big when you can just take a little more off the haircut. Okay, let's cut these apart. It can be cut with a scissors. It can be cut with a rotary cutter. Sometimes it's just easy if you have a mat nearby to bring in a ruler. And then these are all pressed toward the darker side. In this case, the darker fabric does kind of help reduce the bulk in those outer corners a bit, as we're going to be joining seams together here. So pressing this toward the green kind of helps for it to lay nice and flat. Carol asks, what if you don't have a 1/4 inch on the nose? If you are close when you're cutting these apart, it's okay. Just don't get so close that you nick your seam allowance, because I've come close before. But as long as you're leaving at least half, somewhere in that half, don't try to drive down the middle. That's why sometimes a ruler is kind of nice to lay on there, hold still, and then zip across so that you get a fairly accurate 1/4 inch seam allowance. But it's not, no one's going to see the inside of your quilt. It's yours. It's going to be hidden in there. Just leave enough that your seam allowance has some integrity. Okay. Now, I did oversize these just a little bit in my instructions, so they need to be trimmed. And if you follow me at all, I'm one of those people who doesn't mind trimming, because I really don't want to pin later. It frustrates me if things aren't quite the right size, so I like to have them as close as possible. So come in with a ruler so that we can trim. Carol says, good morning from Manitoulin Island, Canada. Yep. And Bobby says, this looks pretty straightforward. I've not done any traditional quilting, but, oh, okay. Foundation paper piecing. So that FPP, I have to think about it for a second. I've done the foundation, which is also really great too. Are you back stitching as you start doing the triangles? No. This was a habit I had to stop doing because I was a garment sewer coming into quilting, and it was instinct for me to backstitch at the beginning and the end of every seam. Except if you make a mistake, you have to take that all out, and that will absolutely destroy your 1/4 inch seam allowance. So try to break the habit. You're going to set a short stitch length. On my machine is a 2.0. Some set it will automatically be at 2.5. It's about 12 stitches per inch if you have an older, more traditional machine. And those shorter stitch length will give a little more integrity to your seam. And we are going to cross all of our seams with another line of stitching, which will ensure that we don't have popping open of the tips of or the beginning or end of our seams. And then we're going to back it with backing fabric, and quilt it. So all of those things will add strength to that seam without having to backstitch. So try to break yourself of that habit if it's something that you've done in the past. A quilt like this isn't going to take the kind of stress and tug that a garment would, where we used to backstitch all the time because we wanted that integrity at the end of each line of stitching. So just kind of give yourself a Post-it note, put it on your machine. Try not to backstitch. And then you'll break yourself of that. Not that it's a bad thing. It's just, it's kind of a holdover from garment sewing, and it becomes part of who we are as people who do sewing. Now I'm trimming. I made sure that I marked on my ruler so I know that these are trimmed at 3.5. And I'm just trimming a little bit off of each side so that I have a nice, neat half square triangle, so that when I go to put all this together here in a second, we'll lay it out, that I will have seams that come together really, really sweet. Now, I didn't take time to trim all of my flying geese, but also make sure that all of the tips are coming outward, because if you put one in there the other direction, you're going to get a different block. And that would be okay as long as all 4 sides are aligned the same way. Sorry. Okay, we've got our 8 points out. The green goes into the corner. The idea is I wanted that white to look like it's floating underneath of the points all the way around, like this. And then we're down to basically putting rows together rows together, and then joining rows. When it comes to the pressing, you're going to want to press the seam allowances in the center, toward the center, because you're not crossing any seams here. So if you put these towards the center, it means you're going to press these outward. And that will give you opposing seams as you join these together. If you're new to quilting, just trust me, press the seams here toward the center. On the top and bottom row, press toward the outer edge, and then you'll get nice intersections here. The last thing I want to point out is that when you start to put this together, and I'll bring in the quilt, when you start to put this together, and this is going to be something in a long row across a bed, is that you want these to be pretty matched up across that sashing piece, that piece that you put between the two blocks. I thought about putting these block to block without the sashing, and those are not fun to join because it gets very thick, and there's always a fight for who gets priority in the join. So I put the sashing between, but then you still want that visual line to line up. So here is your tip. When you cut your sashing pieces in between, they're going to be 1.5 inch wide, like this. And in order to line these up properly, these are going to finish 12. Now, if your blocks don't finish, aren't coming up to 12.5, you may have to adjust this a bit. But this is 12.5 long, so it fits up against your block. Measure on the back side, so on the wrong side. See how it says sashing wrong side? On the wrong side of this sashing bar, measure in 3.25 inch and make a mark. Measure in 3.25 inch and make a mark. And make that as a kind of a line across, just enough so you can see it. That will be the point where it will match up with the points of your star. If your star happens to be off by a little, you may have to do a little adjustment on that because everyone's piecing is kind of unique. It's not always exact. And now that mine is quilted, it's kind of drawn in, so it's not even matching up perfectly because quilting tends to draw and shrink a project a bit. But that 3.25 inch in should be where your tips of your star are, so you can match them up against the sashing and make them look like they're all in a nice straight line across the bed. Okay. As far as quilting goes, I always like to give you just a few tips. I know we're getting a little long here. In the center, I just did I did kind of a diamond shape, a square on point in there. I didn't want to mess up the really fun print there. Didn't do a lot of quilting. In each of the star points, I went in and just did a curl. Whoops, this way. A curl with the matching red thread. I want texture. I don't want to mess up the check or the plaid portion here. So it's a simple swirl in. I did a micro stippling in all the white areas. So it's really tiny. I don't know if the camera can pick that up. Oh, there it is. You can see the stipple there. The red sashing has just a similar swirl to what I did on the red star points, but small, kind of in a kind of a S shape in, back out, and all the way through all of these small areas. And on the large portion, I did a kind of a loop, curls and loops, but you can't see any of it. So meander would be totally fine on a busy fabric like that, just enough to give texture, but not interrupt the design. So I did make sure that I stitched everything so that I kept those lines nice and crisp. And you can see a sample of that on my Instagram page. If you'd like to go to my Instagram page, you'll see the before and after on how different it looks if you do in the ditch first around pieces before you do the actual quilting itself. So making Christmas Dreamin' has been fun. It's been fun to share everything with you. Let's see. Yes, the half square triangles were, Debbie, they were trimmed to 3.5. I don't know if I said 3.33, but it should be 3.5 inches because we have this finishing 6 when the seam allowances are out. These each finish 3, so the block is 12-inch square when we're done. So, okay, I think that finishes Christmas Dreamin'. Thanks for joining me today. Remember, The QR code will take you to find the pattern. It'll get you to all the other wonderful Christmas in July activities and events we have going on. Find something that feeds your soul. Thanks for joining me.